turns out that the other day after my presentation, my lecture, I had I had a visit from the Circus CERN. Okay, Circus CERN came to town over here to where I live, right? And here, yeah, this is the Circus CERN. And they came in there, with everything they've got. They've got the tightrope walkers, the acrobats, the elephants, and they came with the clowns as well. They had all these clowns that came over, okay? And so what do they do? Well, these clowns, they're the bosons, famous bozos, okay? And what do? Well, they do some slapstick kind of stuff, and they smash things in there, I guess. That's what they claim they do. And because of that, they ended up with all these bosons, the Higgs, the Z, the W's, and so on. So they have all these what they call gauge bosons. Okay, so this is what they think is science, and it's a circus. It's a lot of fun. Really, it's you got to take it for what it is. I mean, what's the purpose of clowns? It's to make you laugh, right? So you got to take this as something that should entertain you, okay? And so, don't take it seriously. It's really all in fun. That's what a circus is about, entertainment. And the problem I had that after the circus came to town, I had a visit by all the bozos. And we had a couple bozos. And, it's not that just bozo, came over. He brought his whole troupe. I had several bozos visit me, okay? And again, the purpose of all these bozos is to entertain you, to say, they don't only do slapstick. What they do is they tell jokes, they say stupid things, irrational things, and I guess the ultimate purpose is to make you laugh. That's what a clown does. They clown around, they say things, stupid things to make you laugh. And so here's one of the bozos. He came over, and this is what he had to say. He said, Bill's version of science assumes already have all the available evidence. Okay, he's talking about evidence again, right? And yeah, again, this is one of the problems we have. They're following this ancient scientific method that we've had now for 400 years, and this is what they apply. So they're looking for evidence of some kind. I don't know why. And he puts experimentation investigation into his religious basket. Absolutely, we don't use experiments or investigation. Now, that doesn't mean, no one's going to stop you. I'm not going to put a gun to your head and stop you from doing an experiment at home at your own time, your own leisure. And I'm not going to stop you from experiment or investigating. That's not what science is. When you come to the conference, we want you to explain something. That's where science begins, when you can explain something. You had Michael Faraday. He would do experiments over there at the, Royal Society. And he would do an experiment, usually about electricity, magnetism, and he would wow the crowds. Well, yeah, that's clowning around. That's great. You do an experiment, and people say, oh, man, look how interesting that is. He made electricity. Oh, he caused a magnet to attract another, or whatever he did, right? And yeah, but could Faraday explain anything that he ever did? And the answer is no. He could only do the experiment and say, okay, there it is. I discovered, that this feature of electricity or of magnetism. That's like saying you bumped against the wall and you say, oh, I discovered the wall. Give me my Nobel. I'm the first person to discover the wall. Yeah, you discovered the wall. You haven't explained anything. That's the problem. Okay, so these people, they don't explain anything. They don't realize that that's what science is about, trying to explain. That's where you have to use your brain. But to say, I have evidence. Evidence for what? I don't want to be convinced. I just want to understand. Why are you bringing evidence? Do you think this is a courtroom or what? And again, they harp on belief. They say you have to believe them, just like religion. He's saying that. I'm saying that, okay? And no, I don't use the word believe. First of all, I get rid of the word evidence, okay? That's the hallmark of religion, because you're trying to convince people. That's why it's a hallmark of religion. Then the only purpose of evidence is to persuade the juror and to convince them. Okay, that's why you're introducing evidence. Why would you bring an experiment to the conference room, right? Because you're trying to convince your colleagues, the ones you're presenting to, right? That's the only purpose of an experiment and of evidence. And so I say it's the religious fanatics who present evidence. And you will recognize them. Why? Because they begin talking about belief. And that's what this fellow immediately harps upon. He says it's belief. And I never talk about belief, so I don't know where he got that. He's putting words in my mouth, this clown. And I guess if he's trying to be funny, okay. I didn't see the joke, but maybe someone else does, okay? And so he continues and he says, according to Bill, testing the assumption is not science. Whether you believe my mechanism is your religion. Absolutely. You know, I didn't come here to get you to believe in my mechanism. I explain it so that you understand it. Assumptions, we assume. That's what an assumption is, something to assume. We do not believe in assumptions. Okay? We don't prove assumptions. We don't test assumptions, you know, the hypothesis, as they say. We don't do any of those. We present an assumption so that you understand it. Okay? And we say, look, let us assume blah, 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 blah. And the assumptions include the objects that you're going to present and the definitions, primarily those two. So, you know, I have to show you what I mean by certain words that I'm going to be using throughout my presentation, the key words that make or break my theory. So I say, let us assume blah, 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 that the word object means this, the word exist means that. So, you know, I have to make certain assumptions. You may not agree with my assumptions, but that's not the point. We're not here to debate the assumptions at this point. We are just, or the definitions of words. What I want you to understand is what I mean by them, so that you can follow my presentation. Now, at the end of the show, you might say, Bill, I disagree with your definition. Great. Let's hear yours. And you're supposed to not only attack mine, show what's irrational about my definitions, but also present yours. You know, we can't leave, you know, there's 8 billion people in this conference room, and we have the doors are locked. You can't leave until we define the words properly, because we can't begin to do physics until we have certain words defined. And so the doors are locked. You have to come up with a definition. You can't say, oh, your definition is wrong, Bill. Bye. I'll see you next week. It doesn't work that way. And that's when we introduce, you know, the bgaede respectful treatment of you. We want to treat you with the respect that you deserve. Okay, so yeah, we don't want you to believe in our theory. We want you to understand it. That's what we're here for. Just, you know, understand it. It is irrational to test an assumption, and you know, you can see the theorist's assumption in order to follow the theory. That's it. In order to know what he's talking about. You want to understand the mechanism that he's proposing in physics, right? And in science, there is no place for belief. So this notion about belief, I don't know where he got it. We don't talk about belief here. Quite the contrary. So he says that, you know, I'm insisting on belief. Absolutely not. He's just inventing that because that's what they do. All these clowns, right? And CERN and at NASA and so on. Okay, so he continues. He says, testing a hypothesis. You know, you're going to test an assumption? I mean, what is he talking about? Only confirms that the hypothesis is consistent with observations. Again, they're between, you know, assumptions and observation. They say you can't make an assumption until you observe. And that's not totally true. We're going to handle that in a minute. But he says it does not validate whether or not the hypothesis is ultimately correct. And in particular, does not validate whether the hypothesis is rational. Then why are you going to test it? I don't know why he tests it if it's not rational or you know, if it's not correct. Okay, so what's he going to test? I don't know. And so Bozo Joe, this fellow, right, he's testing the hype that gravity is mediated by particles. You know, so I don't know why he's testing, what's he's trying to test. You know, he's got to explain that. I have no idea what he's trying to test. And here's another thing that he says. He says, Bill says that his version of rational science, he assumes first, yes, then provides a mechanism for that assumption. Absolutely. Yeah, that's what we do. We make an assumption. Let us assume, right, that light is mediated or gravity is mediated by a pair of twine threads. What I call a rope, something that looks like this. It's a rope. This is an analogy. This is a real analogy. This is a valid analogy. Why? Because are we saying that the rope that Mother Nature uses, the one that I'm going to use for gravity, is made out of atoms? It's red and blue. It's all that. No, none of that. It only looks like this, similar to this. And the best analogy is a rope, because I'm talking about a pair of twine threads. Very thin, unimaginably thin, that bind any two atoms. And so you can call it DNA-like, rope-like, any of those is fine, because what we're talking about is a pair of twine threads. That's it. That's the hypothesis. That's the assumption. So we're saying, let us assume. Did I say, please believe? No, I'm saying, let us assume. That's it. And how these people convert that into belief, I don't know. They say, you want us to believe in your... No, I don't want you to believe. I want you to assume so that you understand the mechanism I'm going to explain of light, of gravity, of magnetism, and so on. So I don't know. These people have this in their mind that I ask them to believe in the rope. No, I don't. Okay, so I just want to set the record straight. Here, we're not here to twist your arm. We're here so that we present something and say, let us assume this, and on that, based on that, we're going to base our theory so that you understand it. Once you understand it, we're done with science. Go home, sleep on it, reach your own conclusion. That's the way it's handled. That's science, okay? Because it's objective. It's got nothing to do with, we proved it. Here's the evidence. Please believe. None of that. That's what they do in mathematics, okay? And that's what we've been doing for 400 years. He says, however, his assumption is based on observation, sensations without which there are no assumptions. Well, not true. Here we have the story. I call it the tale or the story of the blind quadriplegic. And here he can't see, he can't touch, so he didn't observe anything, right? And someone comes to him and says, oh, dear sage, you wise sage, I would like for you to explain to me, I saw last night, that an asteroid hit the moon. And he didn't have to see it. He says, what if an asteroid hits the moon? How would you explain it? And the sage explains without ever seeing anything, without ever touching anything, without running an experiment. He just gives them an explanation for the phenomenon that this person did not even have to observe. He just says, hypothetically, what if, right? And then the sage answers the question. See how simple it is? And in fact, for just to challenge what he's saying there, this clown, right? It's very easy. I mean, we do have a case very much like that. His name was Stephen Hawking. He wasn't blind, but he was kind of quadriplegic. I mean, he couldn't move. He was there like this, right? He could barely talk. And after he became the Lucasian chair over there at Cambridge, how many experiments did he do? Did he go to the lab and start experimenting? Did he start observing things? Did he observe ever a black hole, for example, right? No, he started theorizing. He did some armchair stuff in his office. That's what he did. They call it theoretical physics. And he came up with all these conclusions, irrational, all of them. But, so he didn't have to do any experiment. He didn't have to present any evidence. In fact, we have no evidence to this day of anything related to a black hole. It'd be a miracle if they could present any evidence whatsoever, right? No, there's no such thing as a zero-dimensional singularity surrounded by an event horizon, which is simply, there's no surface there. It's not a thing. And these people are, looking through their telescopes to see if they can see it out there. Yeah, good luck. So, we don't present evidence. We do not do experiments. And I think Stephen Hawking is a good proof, evidence, of that. So please believe me, okay? Okay, here's Another thing that he puts in my mouth, this clown, and Bozo Joe. And he says, Bill's spoon experiment just proves that Bill is a lousy scientist and has no idea how to construct useful experiments that answer the question he wants answered. Well, the question I want answered is, very simple. I'm going to let go of the pencil and I want to know why it falls to the floor. I mean, why does it fall down? Why doesn't it fall to the ceiling? And a lot of people want to, it's not only me, a lot of people want to know why the pencil falls to the floor, why the spoon falls to the floor, why the baby falls to the floor, why everything falls to the floor. When you drop the baby, why doesn't he just stand in the middle of the air there or go upwards? That's what we want to know. And so you say, I'm misconstructing the spoon experiment. Well, here's a spoon, right? Want to do it with a spoon instead of a pencil? Here's a spoon, okay? It goes down, okay? I just want an explanation for that. And are we going to answer it with the mathematical method of doing experiments, of measuring, proving, making you believe? Is that how we're going to answer this question? This is a question of physics. It doesn't belong in philosophy for sure, And he says, Bill's version of science, there it is. All experimentation that needs to be done has been done. No, that's not what I say. I say something different. What you see there, I say that in science we do not do experiments. You can do whatever experiment you want at home, at your own time, at your own leisure, okay? When you come to the conference, don't do experiments. Now we want you to explain what the cause of what you concluded. That's what we want to understand. Now, so if you did an experiment, you did the experiment, the spoon experiment, okay, there it is, the spoon experiment. We don't want you coming to the conference and saying, let me do the spoon experiment for you. No, please don't. And don't do it repeatable, even worse, right? Just tell us why the spoon falls down. We want to understand the cause, the mechanism, right? And, it turns out that it's the only question we ever needed answered in physics. Why the spoon falls to the floor. Why the pencil, why the baby, or whatever. Why the parachutist falls to the floor. Why does everything fall to the floor? It's the only question we ever needed to answer. And you say, well, why do we need to answer that question? Well, why is it the end of physics once we answer that question, which is what I'm really trying to say here. Yeah, it's the last question that humans find the answer, and once we answer that question, we're done. We're done with physics. There's no more physics after that. And the reason is very simple, because the only way you can answer this question, the only way, let me say that again, the only way you can answer this question is if you identify, okay, the invisible, intangible things that are attached to the spoon. There are some invisible, intangible things, right, that are attached to the spoon that are forcing it to come down. If there's absolutely nothing here or there, right, then you're doing black magic. So since we can't see or touch them, right, whatever's in contact with a spoon, we can only visualize them. You have to make an assumption. That's what it's called in science. Okay? So we make an assumption of what could possibly be connecting the spoon, for example, to the earth, right? Then we can explain why that spoon falls to the floor. And once we figure that out, what the invisible mediators are, we're done with physics, because now we can explain everything in the universe that we cannot see. All the mediators out there that we cannot see or touch. Why doesn't the moon fly away? Well, because we don't see the mediators between the moon and the earth. Why doesn't the earth fly out of the solar system? Right? What is light? Well, there better be a mediator that unifies gravity with light, and so on down the line. So yeah, once we figure that question out, what causes gravity, what mediator that we cannot see or touch is working in the background that we cannot see or touch, once we answer that question, we're done. We've seen what God sees, or what Adam man sees. He can see what we can't see. Okay, there he sees it. What is it? Whatever is binding a physical object such as a spoon, for example, to the earth. That's it. And once you figure that out, you are seeing the invisible. Okay? And you can only do that with the mind. You can't do that through an experiment. Okay, so what does this bozo say? He says, relegating knowledge and experimental evidence in the column of religion is the epitome of irrationality, and not how I would define the scientific method. Okay? Well, again, the clown's there to make you laugh, so he says stupid things, and that's fine. That's his job, right? No, knowledge is just belief. So we don't have any use for knowledge. Experiment, without an explanation, that's known as ignorance. Means you're an ignoramus because you cannot explain it. I mean, you just do an experiment and that's it. You say, I'm a scientist because I did an experiment. I don't think so. I think it takes a little more than just doing an experiment like, good old Michael Faraday did. Just experiments without any explanation. Evidence, what is it used for? To persuade and convince. So again, all his words have to do with this. Irrationality. Well, what is irrationality? I mean, irrationality is his opinion that he doesn't like something. In science, we define irrationality because science is rational explanations. So hopefully we define those two words, what rational is and what explanations are. And yeah, so we define irrationality, moving concepts around. If you start moving, love around, well, you're not a very rational person. I mean, for the purposes of physics. In poetry, you can do whatever you want. In, ordinary speech, you can do whatever. You can get away with murder over there. But here, no, not in physics. In physics, rationality, you can't move, concepts around, and you better have, sound definitions that you can defend. Okay? If you cannot defend your definitions because someone attacks them, then you got a problem. Okay? And especially if you don't use your definitions consistently, rationally, scientifically throughout your dissertation. And then he talks about scientific method. Well, what scientific method is he talking about? This one, the one we just covered, this thingy, 17th century clowns. There you have them, Galileo, Newton, Gottfried Leibniz, you have Christian, Huygens, and Robert Boyle. These people, they came up with these notions of what science is that we have today. And, again, that's what we've inherited. And none of these things that you see there answer the questions we are looking for. If you look at this methodology, if you look at this notion of science, does this answer questions such as why a spoon falls to the floor? What causes it to fall to the floor? And the answer is no, because they're looking at evidence, they're looking at experiment. We've already got the experiment. We've got the evidence, if you want, We need a theory. We don't have a theory. We have our descriptions that it falls to the floor and at a rate of 9.8 meters per second square. Great. What have we learned about explanation, about the causes? Can we repeat the experiment? Sure. Do we have a critical analysis? Critical analysis of what? We don't have even a theory. What are you going to critically analyze? And verify and test? What are you going to test? What kind of test do you propose? Here's the only test you needed, right? Here is the test, okay? There it is. That's the test. That's the only one you needed. Now, please explain it. Okay, that's all we needed. We need to find out why that stupid spoon falls to the floor. That's all. Okay, but he says that you don't need an object. You don't need a mediator. This is what he's saying. It's so funny. He's really a funny clown, right? So GR says no object needed in the vacuum. In other words, gravity just is. You don't need an object. Why? Because we can't see it, can't touch it, so there's nothing there. That's what he's insinuating. He's saying, look, we don't need an object. He says, nevertheless, that there must be an object is shared by cutting-edge research which posits quantum fields. He thinks a field is a physical object. So you can see why we need to define the word object, because these people think that the word field, the word energy, the word mass are objects. They think those are things. They've brainwashed them so much in high school and college or through the literature, and these people actually believe that and treat these things as objects. That's where the problem is. And no, field is not an object, okay? And so he just believes on the basis of, I guess, Einstein, authority, tradition, maybe, the fact that all the mathematicians raised their hand, democracy. Field is not an object, okay? So this is where the clown really requires that you laugh. It's a laughing matter. And there you have the definition of field, a value at each point in space. So, no, field is not an object. You cannot treat it as a physical object, as people like Sean Carroll say. They say, what is a particle? It's a vibration, local vibration of a field. It's the excitation of a field locally, right? But what was a value at each point in space? So the values are vibrating, and that's a particle. So what's a particle? A vibrating number. That's what it is. And yeah, I mean, if that's what you think a particle is, well, okay, but you're not going to learn much by using mathematical language. They have to correct the language. That's where the problem is. Okay, and then he also curves space-time. He says, even in a perfect vacuum, space-time can still be curved. Again, he's treating these number lines as a physical object. He's talking about the curving of space-time. Okay? He said it's not nothing that's curving. Oh, okay, so what is curving? He says the structure of relationships. He's curving the relationships. What relationships? Distances, times, and paths. Yeah, he's all these concepts, right? And that's what he's curving. And, I want you to pay attention to that word path. It's extremely misleading because, you'll hear these people say that they bent the path of light, and they always put it in those terms. And so people don't really catch that. They say, what do you mean you bent the path of light, around the star, like Arthur Eddington allegedly proved Einstein's theory in 1919 by saying, look, we were able to measure, we were able to see, take pictures of light coming around the sun, and it shouldn't have been there because the star was behind the sun. So the light from that star went around the sun and came to our eyes, to our camera. Okay, that was the proof that they needed to certify Einstein's theory. Bless it, right? And so they talk about the path of light being bent or warped. That's an irrational statement. And it's an irrational statement because why are they using the word bent? Why are they using the word warped? Well, because they're not talking about light. Okay? See, the word path can mean two things. It could be a noun and it could be a verb. And they have this noun-verb thingy in there. And so they say, we bent the path of light, and you're imagining, okay, here was light coming, and it bent light, right? So they talk about bending and warping light, but hold it, light is made out of photons, photon balls, discrete balls. I mean, that is the theory, right? Or the assumption. The assumption is that, light is made up of discrete particles, and here you can say that the photon balls were deflected. Deflected by what? Well, they were deflected by the curvature of space-time. So the path of space-time, see, when you go to the forest, right, you have a path, and that's the road where you take your car or your bike or whatever, right? And they're saying that, you go along this path, the road, the highway, what's underneath your feet, right, going into the forest or wherever, right? And the road is curved, it's warped, okay? But not your car. Your car is not warped, your car is not bent, your car is not, doesn't look like a banana. And they're saying light, the car, is what's curved or warped. But I thought light was made out of all these discrete particles. So you cannot, did the photon bend? Each little photon just bent and warped? No, they're talking about the deflection by the road. The road is the noun. What light is doing is deflecting. But they never put it in those terms, see? And we've had this for 100 years where they use this language. That's why language is absolutely important, critical in physics. You need to tell us exactly what you mean, and they don't do that. They have this duality where they say, oh, the light is curved, the light is warped. And what they're talking about is the path of supposedly space-time there, right? That's the road, right? And the photons are little balls that are deflected. They're curvilinear. They're traveling in a curvilinear way around the curved road. That's what they're saying. Okay? But that's not what. But they need to prove that it's space-time that is curved, so they say light has curved. They don't say light has been deflected. Besides, what are we talking about? Are we talking about the wave or the particles? Can a wave be bent? What is a wave? Well, a wave is two fields, and what are the fields? A bunch of vectors. What are vectors? A bunch of numbers. So what they're bending, what they're warping are numbers. That's what it boils down to. So yeah, space-time is total idiocy, just four number lines. That's what it is. And they turned it into a physical object. So instead of saying four number line, 4n, they say 4D, four dimension, right? And that's where the problem is. And yeah, they're curving the fishnet. That's what they're doing. Okay, here we have another clown. Okay, his name is another clown, another bozo. Okay, so we had boson Joe, and here we have another boson. Okay, and what does this boson say? Well, he says the point of experiments is to test hypotheses. Again, another guy who's testing hypotheses, and they're tested against the data evidence to validate or falsify them. And when you look up the word hypothesis, if you look it up, if you really do a research on it, don't just look at the definition, because you're going to get just one definition. But when you look through the internet, you find all these different notions of what a hypothesis is, and all these are taken from prominent sites. An objective or purpose, a prediction or testable statement, an assumption or guess, an explanation, a theory, and another says it's data analysis. Okay, so are all these synonyms? Is an assumption the same thing as an explanation? Is a prediction the same thing as a theory? So we have a problem because the word hypothesis has covered like 30 bases. All the bases are covered. It's like, hypothesis means everything. We don't know what it means because it's used in all these different ways. And so we have to put the word hypothesis in its right definition, and it's an assumption. That's what it is. That's what it's always been. And all these people have turned it into all these other things. There are these different notions. I'm sure you're going to find a few more if you look around, right? Those are the 6 ones that I found. And we don't test assumptions. So what this fellow's talking about running a test, experimenting on the hypothesis, who knows what he's talking about? You don't test assumption. You don't do an experiment on assumption. You can criticize assumption. You can attack an assumption saying your assumption is wrong. It's irrational. Really not wrong. Wrong is an opinion. You can show that the assumption is irrational. That's the only thing you can do. Okay? If you can show that the assumption is irrational after you define the word irrational, right? Then yes, that assumption goes away. Okay? Otherwise, your assumption stays. And, this is the way we formulate an assumption in science. We say, let us assume that God exists. We don't say, do you believe in God? Do you believe in the existence of God? And the other guy says, no, I don't believe in the existence of God. Yeah, the third guy says, I don't know if to believe in the existence of God or not. No, all those people are irrational. The way we say it in science is, let us assume that God exists. And now you're going to do something with this God thingy. Okay, you can say God created the world, or God made the flower grow, or whatever you want to theorize about. But that's the way we say it in science. God can never be a theory. God can only be an assumption, a hypothesis. Okay, so, how are you going to test the hypothesis? Anyways, I'm wondering. Okay, here's another thing that this bozo says. Oh no, this is the AI. We look up the word hypothesis in the AI, and he says the following. This is what R2D2 tells us. He says, a hypothesis is a what? Proposed explanation, right? But then it says it's a testable statement that predicts. And so again, it talks about evidence and so on. So, they have all these notions. This comes from the AI. And, that's managed by the mathematicians. They're the ones who put this stuff in the bot, right? And so what are you staring at? Well, you're staring at a contradiction. What is a hypothesis? So yeah, the word hypothesis, very dangerous because nobody knows what it means, and that's why we had to define what a hypothesis is, and it is an assumption. What is an assumption that we need for physics? We need the objects that you're going to be using. So we say, let us assume, right, that light is this or gravity is that, the mediator of gravity, the mediator of light, right? And then you have to define your terms. You know, what is an object? What do you mean by exist? What is location? What is motion? You have to define all those key terms that you're going to use throughout your presentation. That's the way it works. Okay, this is Bozo again. He says the following. He says, do you have a testable, falsifiable model for this thread? See, I propose that there's ultimately a single thread in the entire universe that weaves all the atoms and the interconnecting electromagnetic ropes, pair-twined threads. And he's so this fellow doesn't seem to understand that it's an assumption. We make an assumption that there's a single thread in the entire universe, and this thread weaves around, as you can see there in a little picture, if you can see that well enough. You have all these steps. It goes from the single thread. It twines around itself. It creates all the atoms and the interconnecting ropes, as we call them. And there you have our main system, our main proposal, which is two atoms bound by an electromagnetic rope. And with this, we're going to use that assumption. Did we ask you to believe it? No, it's an assumption. We ask you to concede the assumption so that you can understand the theory. What's the theory? That an atom pumps, goes up and down, in other words, expands and contracts, and torques the rope. The torsion is what is light, and you can see there on the upper right all those little stars, or you can call them atoms if you want, connected to each other, and that's going to explain gravity because they're all bound to each other. And we have an explanation based on that model. Again, we have explanations. Do you believe in them? We don't care. Whether you believe or not is irrelevant in science. Okay, what we do is explain so that you can understand the theory. Okay, and but my assumption is the same thing as what quantum mechanics does. Have they observed the particles? Have they proven particles? Well, absolutely not. They've never seen a particle. They've never observed a particle, right? They just make an assumption. They don't realize that they're making an assumption. They say, we observed. And so people say, well, they observed the particle. I mean, who can challenge that? They saw it. And again, that's testifying, witnesses, right? We kill the witness in science. No, that's not the way it works. You make an assumption because that's what they're doing without knowing that they're doing that. And then he says, and then the question is, how do you test an invisible, intangible entity? I mean, you got the mediator of light, right? We can't see the mediator. We don't know what's in there. So how are you going to test that? Well, what kind of test do you propose to get an invisible, intangible mediator, right, for gravity or for whatever? And then or for example, magnetism, right? And there you see right at the bottom that's exactly what they do with the wave. Are we going to falsify a wave? How do you falsify a wave? A wave is just a bunch of numbers. You have the electric field, the magnetic field, two fields that make up the electromagnetic wave, the famous wave, transverse wave, right? And what are the fields made of? All those arrows. What are those arrows? Vectors. And what's a vector? Magnitude and direction. So we have numbers made of numbers made of numbers. That's what a wave is. And they put this thing in motion. So how are you going to, what kind of test do you want to run to test this hypothesis that light is mediated by a bunch of numbers? Okay, well, what test do you propose? And that's the issue. These people don't even know what they're talking about anymore. Because we're going to test a hypothesis. What does that mean? Please tell us. What is your hypothesis? That light is mediated by a wave. Okay, how do you test it? How do you prove it? Okay. Says that I mock observations. Yeah, observations have no place in science. And says you mock the role of the observer. That tells me you've never engaged seriously with quantum mechanics. Observation and measurement affect outcomes. And again, this is the issue. The observation and measurement affect outcomes only in the religion of quantum mechanics. Okay? Never in science. The idiots the IDEOTS of quantum ever observe a particle? And if so, please draw an atom. What does an atom look like? We have these atoms that you find on the internet, and it's just a little ball rolling around another ball. Is that what an atom is? Why doesn't the ball fly away? So they don't have an answer for any of that. They never saw an atom in their lives. Okay, otherwise they would be able to draw it. And did they observe the mediator of gravity? Did you observe the agent that mediates entanglement? I mean, what are you talking about when you observe? You can observe the two objects, objects at the endpoints, but you cannot observe the mediator. And so, I asked him to please produce what he observed. And what we're interested in is not the two particles at the end. We're not interested in the two balls. We're interested in what mediator is between them, right? That is invisible and intangible. That's the one we want him to illustrate, not the two balls. The two balls are easy. Here it is. I'm illustrating them right now. There it is, two balls. Great. I just need to know why when one twirls around, it moves the other one far away without a mediator. What is this? Voodoo science? Voodoo physics? And that's exactly what I call it, because that's what it is. It's black magic. Okay, so here's we have evidence, the issue of evidence. He says, evidence is science. So evidence, which is what I use to persuade and to convince you, that's science? To make you believe? Is that what science is about, to compel you to believe? It says, if you reject evidence, you're rejecting science entirely. I like that. Okay. So what is the purpose of evidence? Isn't it to persuade the jurors, to convince them to change their mind? Okay. Isn't that what all these people do? Like, here you have people who do that. I showed this earlier. Have all these charismatic faith healers and preachers and whatever. And, they present evidence. They present evidence from the Bible. They present testimony from testimonials from people they bring to their shows and so on. So is that what we should believe in? The evidence that these people are presenting? Is that what science is? Just presenting evidence? What evidence are these people going to present? Testimonials? Is that evidence? I observed the ET flying and landing in my backyard, making crop circles. So, no evidence. We don't use that. And here I found in one site it says, science is also often used to refer to the establishment, an elite group of peers that decide whether you know or not. Exactly. That's what it's all become. So science is often used to refer to the community of scientists and researchers who do scientific work. It is this group of people who, through practicing science, effectively define what science is and how science is done. Yeah, they could be flat earthers for all we know, but then we have a flat earth science, right? I like what Feynman said. He said, science is the belief in the ignorance of experts. Absolutely. That's what we have today. People believe, and we should not use evidence or belief, because that's what evidence is for. So if you discover something new, and the establishment votes against you, well, you're in deep trouble, right? Because you'll never get heard by anyone out there in the public. They simply will not allow your information to reach the public, because they have all these peer censors, they call them, right? And they just stop your work. That's what it is. Okay, he accuses me of doing philosophy, this another bozo. He says, we do not do experiments in science or in physics. And he said, what? Rejecting observation experiments, you're doing philosophy. But it turns out nobody defined the word philosophy. What is philosophy? Love of wisdom? So they use these words like philosophy, like if they knew what they're talking about. And you go to Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and the only word you won't find defined is the word philosophy. And we're talking about the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, probably the number one book or reference for philosophy in the world. And the only word they don't define is philosophy. So we don't know what that dictionary is about. Okay? What that encyclopedia is about. Okay, so it's love of wisdom. That's what it is. And again, they rely on this mathematical method Okay, I showed it earlier, and there it is again. This is what we've inherited from these clowns of the 17th century, that this has to do with math and with running experiments and just doing things over and over. What were these people trying to figure out? I mean, what's the purpose of running an experiment? Are we there to figure out what caused it? Well, then I don't need an experiment. I just need to sit at my desk, drink a good bottle of wine, and try to visualize, how Mother Nature could be doing her stuff, gravity and magnetism and whatever. I don't need to run any experiments. We got all the experiments that we need. We don't need any more observations or experiments today. So all these people think about, we need to run an experiment. Why? What's the purpose of it? I mean, here's the experiment that you needed all along for gravity. There it is. Observation, I observed it. There it is. That's also there. Repeatability, let's do it 3 times. There we have repeatability. You got all the elements that these people look for. And after thousands of years, we still don't have an explanation from the mathematical establishment on gravity. Nobody has any idea how gravity works. And they're talking about black holes and holograms and the inside of the surface of the event horizon, and how the things go to the singularity and they never get there, and the singularity probably because it's zero-dimensional, zero volume, and who knows why things don't reach there, and go. And the ones who manage to go through there end up in another universe. They have all this Alice in Wonderland nonsense, and they call it science. No, obviously none of that has anything to do with science, and that's where we're at after 100 years of general relativity. Here's the bozo again, and he says science is about predicting. Okay, let's see if this is true. Science is built on making predictions. Okay, so we have astrology, I guess. It's part of science. They do prediction, maybe hand, reading. They read palms or whatever, right? Einstein predicted gravitational lensing. Okay, and the whole point of scientific model is to predict that what should happen if the theory is true. Okay, meaning an explanation, right? So what is the explanation for gravitational lensing? Well, if you look it up, I looked it up at the AI, gravitational lensing, massive objects bend, the path of light. So are we bending light, or are we, or is it the path that the photons roll, over? What are we bending? Are we bending the path, or the road, or are we bending deflecting the photons along that path? Which one? Is the car the one that's being bent, or is it the road that's bent? Okay, that's the question. And so I say, is light mediated by a stream of photons? And AI confirms, yes, light is mediated by a stream of particles called photons. So just in case, we have the right answers from the AI here. And so the theory is bunk. It's garbage, because we don't know what's bending. And by bending, you're treating space-time, meaning time, as a physical object. You're saying time is being bent. Does that make any sense? I mean, we're not talking about an analogy here. We're saying time, is a physical object, and we're bending it. So I don't know what analogy you can put in for that, right? It's just an irrational nonsense. And so again, did the photon ball bend? Was it the itinerary that bent? What is it that bent? Okay. And again, by what mechanism did mass bend either the ball or the itinerary? How did mass bend space-time? I mean, mass is kilograms, right? And you put kilograms on top of number lines, I'm not sure what you're going to bend there. You have concept on top of concept. And so I just want him to predict an explanation. So all these clowns, they make you laugh because, they say stupid things, irrational things, and that's okay. I mean, that's their job. But just be aware of what they're saying, all these clowns. Okay, here's this clown also confuses science with technology. He says, explain space telescopes, medical trials. Well, that's technology. It's got nothing to do with science. Okay, it says LIGO gravitational wave observatory. And LIGO is all poppycock garbage. That's all it is. All of it can be washed away. It's just a waste of money. That's all that LIGO was. Okay, concluded that gravity is what? Mediated by waves. That's what LIGO concluded. They said it's waves on what? On space-time. But there's no object in physics called wave, first of all, and then space-time is 4 number lines. So what are we talking about? What's the physical interpretation? What is the theory? Okay, so they proved that gravity is the waving of number lines. Great. And so he doesn't realize that. He doesn't understand this clown, and I guess that's why he's so funny. It's funnier when they actually believe. When they're not, when they're not acting, they're actually dumb. They're not acting stupid, they are stupid. Okay, and he asks also, why does GPS work? Okay, let's see. So, why does your GPS work? Why do airplanes fly? Why does your phone connect to satellites? Okay, so again, Bozo Clown is funny because he doesn't understand that science has nothing to do with technology. Okay, science, rational explanations. Technology, developing gadgets by trial and error. Science has no purpose whatsoever except to make you understand the universe. That's it, to make you smarter in that sense. That's it. It's got no other purpose, science. And technology is something else. You develop a gadget that you can use. Yeah, that's separate. Nothing to do with science. And again, you have good old Edison. He developed technology. He knew nothing about science. He did not know what electricity was. He did not know at the time, talking about the 1880s thereabouts, he knew nothing about, what an atom looked like, or even today, what an atom looked like, what an electron looked like, what electricity was. He didn't know any of that. But he was able to develop technology by trial and error, period. That's it. And he says, does GPS prove that time, or I'm saying to him, does GPS prove that time is a physical object, can be bent and warped? And so you look it up, it's gravity probe B confirmed that the Earth's rotation drags what? Time around with it. It drags time. That's what these people are saying. The gyroscope measured the warping of time around a massive object. The gyroscopes were suspended and centered using electric fields. So what came in contact with the gyroscopes was something called fields. What are fields? A bunch of numbers, a value at each point in space. So they have these fields, and with this they were able to prove that, the Earth drags time around itself. It's poppycock from beginning to end. None of this survives rationality. None of it survives in science at all. And here we have a definition of a quantum particle, just in case. Right? The idiots of mathematics claim they accelerate particles. At the CERN, and because this is from the CERN, Circuit CERN, right? In the religion of quantum mechanics, a quantum particle is what? A magical particle, whatever particle is, right? Whatever it has, magical properties. And there I looked it up, and those are official definitions. Particle, what? A small localized object that can be described by various physical or chemical properties. But then you have the quantum particle. What's a quantum particle? A subatomic particle with unique properties governed by quantum mechanics, such as what? The ability to exist in multiple states simultaneously and exhibit wave-particle duality. In other words, it's both a wave and a particle, and it can be at two places at once. That's what a quantum particle is. So it's got these magical properties. In fact, it's beyond magical because nobody can imagine a particle at two places at once. Nobody can imagine anything even remotely like that, so we're not even talking about rationality. If you can at least illustrate it, you say, well, I don't believe that that's what's happening, but I can see what you're saying. But here you can't even see what they're saying because they cannot put one particle at two places, the same particle at two places. How are they going to, please illustrate that. And so they believe in all this nonsense, and they don't realize that there's a total contradiction. It's all irrational. Quantum mechanics and general relativity are both irrational, not to mention string theory. Okay, so how do they determine some of this stuff? Like, they sent the gravity probe B, NASA did a few years ago, I think it was 2008, and they proved, again, that the Earth drags time around itself. And this is the official version, this is from the AI, right? Gravity probe B was a NASA mission designed to test what? Predictions. They test predictions, right? Of Einstein's theory of general relativity. The mission confirmed that the Earth's rotation, what? Drags time around with it, right? They call it frame dragging, and that the Earth's mass warps time, okay? So we're dragging time and bending time. Now, please try to tell me what that means. What do you mean you bent time? What does that mean? And no, it's not an analogy for anything. You can't. There's nothing I can put in there to serve as an analogy for the bending of time, because time is a concept. So it's irrational to say that you're going to bend time, warp the seconds, bend the minutes. What is that? What does any of that mean? Okay. Okay, so this bozo, another bozo, he continues. He's saying, you don't need to see gravity to study its effects. So he's saying he's just going to look at the things that he can see and not what he cannot see. Okay, we observe what it does. Yeah, but what is doing it? And he cannot observe that. Obviously, he's blind to it, right? And so it says we define it operationally through mass and acceleration. Well, operational functional definitions are irrational. Okay, they were created by mathematicians who cannot define the words at the beginning of their presentation, so they define it at the end after running an experiment or telling you the whole story. So you went through the whole dissertation without understanding what they mean by that word, and at the end of the presentation, they say that's what we meant by such and such word. Okay, so that's the way they define it in retrospect. And they define it by an experiment. Said, well, if you understood the experiment, that's the definition. Okay, so they're defining through experiments. Okay, and it says, and because you have no idea what mediates gravity, you end up with idiocy like black holes, dark matter, wormholes, gravitons, and so on. So they ended up with all this nonsense, right? Over the years, and it's like nobody challenges us anymore because everybody just bought into the language. And so the question is, are we doing science anymore? Jesus Christ. And he insists, that you don't need to see the object. You don't need to visualize what mediator is in there. And so he says, look, action at a distance does occur. Well, yeah, we're not saying it doesn't, but, it's because you can't see the mediator. That's why there's action at a distance. There is no real action at a distance if you could see the objects, right? And so he says, you dismiss action at a distance as voodoo, exactly. But quantum entanglement and field theory show that interactions across space are real phenomena. Yeah, tell me about it. They are experimentally verified. Yeah, that there is an effect that the spoon falls to the floor, that's true. We acknowledge that. The question is, why does it? He's just telling me, it is so. It does happen. Gravity does happen. Yeah, no kidding. And so the question there is, experiments haven't verified any explanation, causes, mechanism, physical interpretations. What causes entanglement? What causes gravity? All you said is that the idiot like you lets go of the spoon and it falls to the floor. No kidding. Why? What physical entity causes the spoon to fall to the floor and not to the ceiling? That's what you got to answer. And again, I like to say that if we can answer gravity, we're done with physics completely. But look how simple this is, right? Here, let me show you an example so that you understand what the question is. These people don't even understand what the question is. Here you see a cowboy pulling on a donkey, okay? But you don't see the rope. You don't see the thing that he's pulling on. How is he dragging the donkey towards him? Is it by magic? There's no mediator there, nothing between the cowboy and the donkey? Now, if I make visible, what's in there, for example, here I'm going to put a rope. Okay, so now I've got a rope in there. Now we can understand it. We say, okay, I understand that. Do I need to know any math? Do I need to know any calculus to be able to understand what's going on there? The cause of why the donkey is being pulled towards the cowboy? All I needed was to put an object. But if you don't have an object, mediator, then you have a problem. You're doing black magic, action at a distance. So there is no such thing as action at a distance. Action at a distance just means that there's a mediator you cannot see or touch, right? But let's put a different mechanism. How about this mechanism? Okay, here we have it with waves. Can you attract because they talk about gravitational waves. Okay, there you have a wave. Can you attract the donkey with waves, whatever waves are? Because again, you have to keep in mind that these waves are part of space-time. So I don't know. I guess you have to imagine them like that, transverse waves. And how about this one? Is this mechanism any better? Throwing particles at the donkey. Is that how you attract a donkey, by throwing particles at it? I mean, what mechanism do you think is going to explain to you, of all those three, the rope, the particles, the waves, of why what caused the donkey to come towards, the cowboy? And hopefully there's a physical mediator that you cannot see or touch for gravity. Otherwise, you're doing black magic, voodoo physics, voodoo science. That's what you're doing. And I've shown this in the past. I'd like to show it again because people say, well, Bill, where did you get the idea that there's a mediator? Well, again, you don't have to believe in me, okay? We're not asking you to believe here. Why don't you believe in authority? Here's authority for you. And listen carefully to authority, because here is someone from Stanford University, a magical physicist, so-called, right, physicist. And he's going to tell you in your face. Here it is. Listen to him carefully.
If you have the Earth with its big mass here, and you have you with your little mass here, that every atom on the Earth is pulling on every atom of you. You're also pulling on it. You're pulling on atoms right now on the other side of the Earth. There's a lot of atoms here you're pulling on. You're pulling on all of them. The amazing thing about gravity is it goes right through things.
So you have every atom on Earth is pulling on every atom of you. You're also pulling on it. What are you pulling with? What is each atom in your body pulling with? Action at a distance? You just pull. One atom pulls on another and there's nothing there in between them. You do entanglement. This one affects that one. No mediator between them. You have a gluon, a strong force, and it mediates, the attraction between two quarks. So how does it do it? It's a little particle that goes back and forth, this gluon? Or are you going to put what they always put, a little bed spring to show that the two quarks are connected? Why do they put a bed spring? They should just put nothing in there. Right? I mean, if we're going to do everything by magic without a mediator, then, why even worry about any rationality? All that is just Alice in Wonderland nonsense, poppycock. Okay, so this clown, he's also a little upset that I called atheism a religion. And so this is what he has to say about that. He says, atheism is not a religion. It's the lack of belief. Okay, so we have, the belief in the lack of belief, or the disbelief in belief, or you can word that any which way you want it, because that's what atheists do. They just try to get around the word belief, and they can't, because atheism has only to do with belief, and they got all that from the mathematical establishment, from the mathematical method, mathemagics. Trying to paint atheism as a religion just redefines words to suit your bias. No, I'm not redefining anything. I'm saying atheism, has to do with belief. And if it has to do with belief, disbelief, skepticism, whatever you want to call it, knowledge, right? Any of those words, it doesn't matter which word you use. It has to do with belief, and belief has to do with religion only. We don't use belief. We have no use for belief in science, in physics. Okay? Atheism is simply not believing in God. He just repeats over and over, the disbelief in God, the non-existence of God, and et cetera, et cetera. Lack of evidence. So he wants evidence to prove. And so, I like to prove to him, in fact, I proved it to him the other day, that, in fact, God does exist. And I'm going to show that right now in a minute. But, atheism has to do with the religion of mathematical physics. Why? Because it relies on belief. That's why. And so, as long as you introduce belief, disbelief, skepticism, knowledge, any of those words, you are doing religion. And that's why atheism is just another religion, period. It's just that simple. Don't beat around the bush anymore, okay? Here's the definition of atheism again. One of the three religions, together with theism and agnosticism, and I'm only talking about the traditional ones, that follow the mathematical method of doing science. There it is. And what's the mathematical method? There we have the 17th centuriers. Okay, there it is. And they're the ones who talked about belief. And that's what we have today, belief. Okay, it's all about convincing you, persuading you. All the evidence, what's the evidence for? To convince you. That's what it is. That's what it's been for the last 100 years at least. That's what quantum mechanics and general relativity do. They try to convince you. Okay? And so, when he says that there's no evidence, no proof that God exists, I say, look, here it is. And I show him a picture of, God painted by, Michelangelo. So you have this picture of God, and say, there it is, proven that God exists. He said, well, that's a two-dimensional God, Bill, can you produce one that's three-dimensional that I can see at least? And so I get my wife and I say, there it is. There she is. You can see her. And you can even touch her. She's 3D. So, well, but that's not God. You're changing the words. No, that is God. That's God. She's God. In fact, if you say that she's not God, I'm in trouble here. I don't want to suffer the wrath of God here. So I'm going to leave you alone with her. It says, yeah, but you're redefining your words. You're saying you're redefining the word God. I'm not redefining anything. You asked me to prove the existence of God. There's the God you can see and touch her, 3D, right? So what's your problem? That's God. Tell her that she's not God. And I fear for her wrath, So yeah, we prove the existence of God. But I can prove the existence of God. Here's my wife. She's in the kitchen. That's God. Okay. And he says, you've just committed an equivocation fallacy by redefining a concept mid-argument. Well, first of all, God is not a concept. God is a physical object, okay? He made the universe. He better be an object, not a concept. But these people don't know the difference because they never defined the words. They never defined words such as object and concept, so they have no idea. They use these words very liberally. Then they say that I'm doing word salad and that I'm doing semantics. Who's doing semantics is them. They're the ones who are doing word salad because they never define these terms, okay? So you're redefining a concept. What concept? God is a physical object, okay? And there it is, my wife. She's a physical object. You can see her, touch her, that's God. And so we don't define objects. We point to them, name them, and I said, wife, there she is. And anyways, that's my God, okay, not yours. You asked me to produce God, I produce my God. You don't like my God, you're an atheist then. You don't like my God. But again, we're not talking about what God does. You say, well, does she perform miracles? My wife does sometimes produce miracles, and she does it by word of mouth. She makes me do things that I don't want to do, and I cut the lawn or wash dishes or whatever. Yeah, she gets me to do a lot of things by remote control. But we're not talking about what she does or what she did yesterday, what she will do in the future. We're talking about her existence. There she is. She's existing. What do you want me to tell you? You wanted a 3D God? You can see her, touch her. That's 3D God. We're talking about existence, not about what God does. First, we got to solve the question of existence. And my wife is God, no doubt in my mind. Okay, so he's saying that I'm redefining all the words in the dictionary, right? And no, we define two words. One is the word object, the other one the word exist. And he says, you're loudly insisting that only physics has the right to use the terms exist and object. Yeah, physics has a complete monopoly. Those two words are the exclusive province of physics. Then you go into to redefine both based entirely on your personal conceptual framework, not on established physical theory or evidence. Well, first of all, it's not an issue of mine or yours. It's an issue of is it rational or not. If it's rational, then we have to use it. And right now, no physical theory has ever defined the word object or the word exist. And I don't know why he puts evidence. What evidence do you need for the word object? You need to define the word, not evidence. I mean, he's talking nonsense. And again, that's what clowns do, these bozos. You're creating your own vocabulary, redefining core terms. Yeah, but core terms, nobody defined these terms in the last 10,000 years. That's the issue. Okay, nobody has defined these words. And if you, instead of just accusing for nothing, without any justification, put down the definitions. Show me that your definition is rational. I don't care where you get it. Put a definition that you think belongs to physics, and let's analyze it. Let's attack it. Okay, let's find out what you're offering. And so I'm saying that the person doing wordplay is the one who alleges that a scientific definition is a personal opinion, right? It's not a question of opinion. It's a question of what does the definition say? That's what it is. Doesn't realize that physics requires objects. So you need to define the word object because you can't do physics without an object. Okay? And then goes through the motion of using reified concepts such as energy, field, time as objects. Okay? Never discovered that physics is the science of existence. That's what physics is. Only a physicist has complete monopoly of the word exist. The job of a physicist is to tell us what he thinks exists out there, and with that thing that he's proposing, he's supposed to give explanations of how this universe works. That's why physics is the science of existence, and only physics. There is no such thing called ontology. There's no such thing called metaphysics. There's no such thing called philosophy that deals with with existence. The word object and exist belong exclusively to physics. Anyone crossing the line into physics or trying to use those words has crossed the line into physics, period. And that therefore a physicist must begin by defining two words that make or break his theory. The words object and exist. Doesn't realize that no one in the religion of mathematics has ever defined the word object and exist. Doesn't explain what is irrational about the definition proposed by the proponent, the physicist, right? And doesn't propose alternative definitions. So instead of just crying and whining, right? What he should do is say, look, this is what is irrational about your definition. Not saying, instead of saying, oh, but this is your definition, Bill. No, forget about my definition or Johnny's definition. Is the definition rational or not? Why is it irrational? Please define rational and irrational first. That's the first issue. And then give us a counter proposal. What do you propose for the words exist or object? Because they're nowhere to be defined on planet Earth. And so this notion that he has in the back of his mind, this clown, he says, oh, they've been defined for physics, we've been using them for 1,000,000 years. No, there's never been a definition of the word object and exist. And I can prove it to you. You want proof? Here's proof, okay? Just take it from me. Here's evidence, proof, certification, verification, falsification, the whole works, okay? I'll give it to you in one shot. Look for any textbook of physics on planet Earth. Pros and cons, people talking in favor, people talking again. Go into the electric universe and whatever they wrote. Go to any book on planet Earth. See if they begin by defining the word object and the word exist. I've never seen it in any book. I haven't looked at all of them, but I could swear that there's not a single book on planet Earth, in China, in Russia, in Africa, in South America, in Europe. Nowhere will you find a book, textbook of physics, right, that begins by defining the word object and the word exist. And that's why nobody knows what an object is or what exists out there, and because they don't know that, they cannot explain gravity, light, magnetism, electricity, etc. That's why. So yeah, I have a right to ask, to demand that you define the word object and the word exist. Otherwise, you're not doing physics, because you can't do physics without those two words. And so here's the final note that he made. He said quantum field theory is based on constituents and interactions, because we're talking about what an object is made of. And no, an object is not what it is made of, because an object that is made of objects. So you have objects made of objects which are made of objects. That's all you said. So it's irrational because it's just an endless iteration. Okay, you don't go to hand wave that because it's inconvenient for your definitions. It's not a question of hand waving. We need to define, and this fella says I'm not going to define it. I'm saying he's essentially saying that he's going to define an object as that which is made of objects. So he hasn't defined anything. Okay, he's just using a synonym or relying on a synonym, right? Saying an object is made out of objects which are also made out of objects. That's all you said. And so let's get it right, bozo. Okay? It's not that objects can be analyzed by their parts. We are talking about a definition of the word object, right? The idiots of math, right, define the word object as that which is made of matter, right? That's what you find in the Wikipedia. Others define it as that which you can see or touch, right? So we have these two notions out there, both or all three notions are irrational. Okay, so any of those are easy to tear down. Don't bring me any of those definitions because I will treat you with the respect that you deserve. Okay, they use the see-touch definition also, right? And do all their physical interpretations were reified concepts anyways, that they cannot see or touch. The field, energy, charge, waves, what are they talking about? And they use all these as physical objects. That's the way quantum mechanics works, and also relativity and string theory. It's not that science hand waves the idiocy of mathematics because it is inconvenient for the definitions of physics. It's that, the definitions render irrational all the theories of quantum, relativity, and strings. That's why you elude defining the words and call it semantics. He dismisses it as a semantic argument. So, yeah, another boson, he's got to go back to the Circus CERN, okay? And do his clowning around over there, because here we're going to put him straight. We're going to set him straight on the correct path.